Sometimes on Beyond the Notes, we dig hard into very serious and consequential topics. And sometimes we, are a little bit more shallow. Today on Beyond the Notes, we'll be looking at the Latin Vulgate, the Septuagint, and Dolly Parton. And if you don't think that's possible, stay with us today on Beyond the Notes. Last Lord's Day, we were in Genesis 37 as we began our study of Joseph. And one of the sort of iconic images that emerge from the early life of Joseph, this Genesis 37, 17-year-old version of Joseph, is Joseph and his ketanet pasim, often translated coat of many colors. But as I was preparing to preach on this passage, in sort of classic Beyond the Notes style, a little side trail opened up. And that side trail, first spotted by me as a footnote in my Bible, that the term translated coat of many colors might not mean that at all. That the phrase ketanet, the pasim, ketanet being the noun, pasim being the adjective, ketanet undeniably means robe or tunic. No one would question that. But the adjective pasim is a fairly unusual adjective, and it might not mean multicolored at all. It might simply mean ornate or long-sleeved. Probably ornate, long-sleeved, linked together. Now, before I go too much further, the point of the passage in Genesis 37 that Jacob, Israel, made for Joseph a distinct garment that fanned the flames of his brother's jealousy, that point is on point, regardless of the character of the specialness of the garment. It may have been a multicolored garment, or it may have been a long-sleeved ornate garment. We're not talking about theology and doctrine here. We're looking down the rabbit hole. This is Beyond the Notes. So we get this intriguing phrase, ketanet pasim. And in the 2nd and 3rd centuries before Christ, there is created, many of you will have heard of the Septuagint. It is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. And in that Greek translation of the Hebrew New Testament, the idea of a coat of many colors, pasim, is definitively translated into Greek as multicolored. Now, that's not the original Hebrew text of Genesis. It's an interpretive translation into Greek that picks up on the idea of many colors. The New Testament itself is silent on the character of Joseph's coat. The later Latin Vulgate in the 4th century AD also picks up on the idea of the multicolored coat. And as the standard bearer of English translations, the King James Version uses the phrase coat of many colors. Meanwhile, back to the Hebrew text, pre-Septuagint and pre-Vulgate, it's ambiguous. And so some later English translations, for example, and I did a little looking around, the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, translates it as a coat with long sleeves. And the New American Bible, one of the branches of the New American Standard family, refers to it as a long tunic. Now, it's interesting that ESV, that we preach from here, tries to have it both ways. Instead of using the King James coat of many colors, The ESV leans into a robe of many colors, thus sort of nuancing the long ornate tunic idea as well as the many colors idea. The rest of the Old Testament, the term is only used once, one other place. The kethanet pasim is only other turns up elsewhere in the long dresses worn by the princesses, the virgin daughters of the king, in 2 Samuel 13. It occurs twice there in that in the paragraph between verses 15 and 19 as the garment worn by the princesses of Israel is also a kethanet pasim. So there's not really a whole lot of help in other places in the Old Testament. So this idea of a coat of many colors finds its way into pop culture. I did a little digging. The Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is ironically many people's first introduction, at least in the 70s, to the idea of Joseph, perhaps not at first realizing the musical was produced as a follow-up to the Andrew Lloyd Webber Jesus Christ Superstar, which is pretty awful. And this Joseph is actually a somewhat closer to not blasphemous. Wow, somewhat closer to not blasphemous. That is the faintest compliment I'll ever give. At any rate, that musical, the Joseph musical, comes out in London in 74. It releases on Broadway in 82 and is a straight-to-TV movie in 99, establishing pretty firmly the idea of the multicolored coat. And then Dolly Parton releases a song in 1971, Coat of Many Colors, about a childhood coat her mama made for her from multiple colors of rags and scraps. And her mama tied that gift of that coat to Jacob's love for Joseph back from the Genesis 37 account. By the way, that song also drove a 2015 TV movie. So, did Joseph have a coat of many colors? Or did he have just a fancy, longer tunic? I lean toward the latter. But in leaning toward the latter, a fancy, longer tunic, not necessarily multicolored, I find myself disagreeing with both Andrew Lloyd Webber and Dolly Parton. I suppose I'll have to live with that. At any rate, we're glad you're still tuning to the podcast. We're glad you're sharing it and listening, and we're glad when we're serious, and we're glad when we occasionally get to be, well, a bit silly. Either way, be with us next week when once again we go beyond the notes.